Good afternoon, good evening. We are on time. So the clock is ticking and it's 4 o'clock. So it's time for our final keynote of the day, of the second day of the conference, Discourses of Childhood and Social Education. So thank you for staying with us for the 2 days. And I have a great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Kathleen Mannion from Royal Roads University in Canada, who will talk to us for the next 20 minutes, and then we will close the conference. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor, and the floor is yours.
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and start. And when it comes up, if you could put it up, that would be fantastic, because I don't want to make people wait anymore.
Okay.
But I am, thank you. So I'm going to talk to you today about child rights as a catalyst for social education. And I thought that was a nice way to wrap up the few days that you've had so far. Thank you so much. I am so sorry that I couldn't be there with you in person. It looks like such a fantastic agenda, and I am coming to you from the west coast of Canada in Victoria from Royal Roads University. So I haven't been able to join you virtually either because the time zones haven't allowed me to do so. But it is so exciting to be here as part of this conversation. And before I begin, I just really want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that here in Canada, as part of my commitments to decolonization, I have to spend a little bit of time just acknowledging the lands on which I'm actually situated. So Royal Roads University, and where I actually live, is situated on the lands of the Kusapsan and the Algonquin families and ancestors. And it's important that I say this in this forum also, because it's important to recognize the beautiful exquisite lands that I'm on and get to play and work and live on. But beyond that, it's important for me to recognize the people that came before me in this place, because they hold so much wisdom, and it taught me so much about thinking through the time scales of the issues that we're thinking about, thinking in much longer time scales, but also challenging notions of individualistic approaches to working with children and young people, and looking more at worldviews that support collective responses. So with that, I wanted to jump in and talk about children's rights. So I'm sure over the last few days, you've talked about childhood discourses and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the central space that it takes in thinking about children's rights and how it impacts our conversations about childhood. So for over 30 years, this central document has really had amazing impacts on our discussions on children. But beyond that, also the 70 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been brought into being. Now, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child has a range of fantastic successes, but it also has a number of challenges. And given that it has been more than 30 years now since it's come into being, it's really time to think about how can we move forward with this? And not just thinking about the convention as it's situated or children's rights as we talk about them, but giving a critical lens to what children's rights can and should be, and finding different ways of interpreting them in practice. And I think that Rudy Rue has suggested this in his talk. So what I'm going to argue in this presentation is that by embracing and challenging those critiques of children's rights and the United Nations Convention, we can utilize that space where those challenges and those critiques are to make it a better, more effective tool to implement. And I would suggest that you can do that within schools, within educative settings, to really support the idea of emancipatory and participatory approaches to advance social education. So to do that, I wanted to make a few suggestions. One suggestion is that we think about more than the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child as a legal instrument. It is a legal instrument. Its purpose is to hold states accountable to their commitments to the international community and to their citizens. But I would suggest that it is much more than just a legal instrument. It has become a far-reaching social commitment for actors much beyond the state. And I think that in thinking through what we've learned from the implementation of the convention, we can really leverage that rights-based social contract that it suggests to us. It has catalyzed a range of individuals and organizations to shift their norms to different ways of being and experiencing and supporting children and young people. And I think that we can further bolster that with some thought. I wanted to look at some of the critiques and some of the praises of rights-based approaches to working with children and young people. And to do so, I thought it would be useful to look to Geertz's anthropological description of culture, where he discusses culture as having both thick and thin approaches. And if we think of thick approaches to rights and thin approaches to rights, we can work our way through some of those critiques and praises to a greater depth of understanding. So if we think about thick descriptions of rights, we better understand the nuanced aspects of them. We can better understand how they are connected to location, and think through some of these different tensions that I've raised here. We tend to use thin descriptions of rights where we're just really looking at the surface elements of them. But I invite people to look more deeply. And indeed, I'm quite sure some of your speakers have done exactly that. So some of the tensions that I thought were useful to think about are the tensions between rights and responsibilities. I do a lot of teaching in elementary school to children about children's rights, and it's a great deal of fun, and it catalyzed this particular presentation. But one of the things that I'm always really sure to emphasize is that connection and the unbinding importance of rights and responsibilities. If you have rights on their own, it becomes a problematic individualistic approach. But tying it to responsibilities, you get more of an understanding of the collective responsibilities, that you only have rights if you are sharing in the responsibilities for upholding and respecting others' rights. So in that way, it becomes a very communal approach to rights. And I think in that case, it also becomes a very important element of educational and social education within classrooms. One of the other things that is important in terms of the attention is the gap that can come between the aspirations of rights, all rights, human rights, but also children's rights, and what actually happens in reality. This was pointed out by Ignatieff in 2000, and also pointed out by Van der Waal and his colleagues in 2019. Thinking through what is promised and what is actualized is, again, important because I think it's important to have those aspirations, but it's also important to work towards what can we actually implement and put in place. So the other tension that's important and has been since the inception of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and beyond is the tension between individual and collective rights. I think for far too long, we have focused much too much on individual rights, and there's space really to embrace more collective rights. And I think that they do work quite well in tandem when you do look at a thick description of rights. Now, a range of people have talked about age and stage of rights, and that's important. Understanding that rights are in development across different stages, but also that children's voice, regardless of their age, is really important to to their realization. And I think we've become much better at recognizing and drawing on children's voice, but we still have much more to go. The last two are very related. The idea that there's a tension between a singular or a plural worldview for far too long, and some of your speakers have spoken to this as well, that worldviews can confine our understanding of children's rights, and that having dialogue with a greater diversity of people can support us to expand our worldviews and expand our understanding of a given topic. I think Reinhardt and Roos in 2017 talked about children's rights come with a whole range of biases and assumptions, and it's important to challenge those in order to get the best out of what children's rights means. And similarly, I think we can also get really stuck into a universal understanding of children's rights when we need to have rights that are localized, that are situated and contextualized where children are. So I think in really delving into those concepts, we can better bring children's rights education and education involving children's rights much closer to the fore and much better in alignment with social education and social pedagogy. And by doing the work of looking at the thick descriptions, we can uncover and challenge some of those assumptions and biases, which would support better inclusion within schools, a deeper understanding, and more efficacy. Now, in looking at the concepts of social education and pedagogy, this is new to me. This is not a space that I inhabit, and yet it is so very familiar. So the idea of social education is centering human dignity, concepts of equality, voice, respect, undergirding this concept of ethics of care, and then drawing on, as Cameron suggested in 2004, heart, hands, and head. We really get this beautiful space for integrating children's rights education. And I think that Claire Cameron and Derek Smith both talked about during this session with you concepts that support that this is a space to either support reframing how we support children or creating trauma-safe school environments. Further, I just want to propose the idea that within education, we have often thought of children's rights quite narrowly, but I really think that in building in some critical thinking about children's rights and children's rights education, we can better leverage this as a space to undergird education and social education in particular, because I think that it can offer powerful and a meaningful foundation for pedagogy. And in doing the work that I do with children in elementary schools, I can see that it really does work. And in working with teachers, can see that it supports their understanding of a whole range of different components of education and well aligned with their social evolution and their social lives. Koval and colleagues have suggested that it can really support an increased engagement within schools when you're focused on children's rights education. It supports a commitment to learning. It builds confidence and self-esteem and enjoyment, achievement, and academic aspirations. So they're all good reasons to build on children's rights education within schools. The work that I have done is also really focused on participatory approaches because they work. We draw on arts and creative approaches to work with children because that's how children learn, but also because that's built into the structure of children's rights, that their voice matters. And in doing that, we can work towards an emancipatory approach to education. And with that, really, that was my proposal to you, and hopefully it ties in with a lot of the conversations that you were having. I think Professor Mahesh had talked about social lives being created through a series of changes, and in the same way, I think we could tease something out here of looking to a series of changes to inspire us to dig a little bit deeper into what children's rights are and what they can actually provide us. That it is a normative approach to a social commitment, which I think beautifully ties in with social pedagogy and social education. We know that where we're at in the world right now, children don't have their full rights realized, probably in any state. And yet having those aspirations to work towards support us to really do better and to use this instrument to support us, to keep us on track. And I invite you to lean into those tensions to support the work that you're doing in whatever you're doing with children and young people. And with that, really, I invite children's rights to be a catalyst for social education. And I hope that I've stayed to my time, even though it was a slow start. But I thank you very much. And thank you so much, Anna.
I wish you could hear the clapping in the whole C, but in the lecture THC. But I'm sure everyone enjoyed this very interesting final keynote that wrapped up the ideas that were viral during this conference. And I want to thank you for joining us. And it's probably early in the morning in Canada. And it's quite a nice afternoon here. So a brilliant afternoon to go out into to the sunshine in Warsaw today. Thank you everyone for sticking on till the end of the conference. Thank you so much, all the organizers, all the organizing committee, all the scientific committee, and a special thanks to Dr. Eva Dombrova, the co-organizer of the whole event, to the ICT people, to the Inspirator Foundation, who is doing the online part of the conference and the hybrid part of the conference. I would like to thank all the presenters and all the participants for being with us, and I hope to see you next year in September at yet another conference at the Maria Grigorievska University. Thank you so much.